Welcome to the High Vibration Reset, the podcast for women ready to step into their next level of success without burnout, overthinking, or ever feeling undervalued. I'm your host, Ciara Conlon, and for the past 18 years, I've been helping women take full ownership of their growth, their voice, their work, and their leadership. Not just to succeed personally, but to create real impact in their communities, workplaces, and in the world. In today's episode, I'm joined by Jen Mirara. Now, Jen is a guide and coach whose mission is to help women feel more at ease in their bodies, but also feel more aligned in their lives. And she does this through nervous system regulation, emotional well-being, and stress management. Her work has a lovely blend of both science and spirituality, and she draws from many practices like Kundalini Yoga, meditation, and somatics. And in doing this, she's able to offer really practical tools that support and can create lasting change. So before getting into this work, Jen spent many years working in a corporate environment. But unfortunately, her corporate success led to severe burnout and serious health issues. And it was this that sparked a personal transformation and a deep interest in understanding the science of stress and the nervous system and emotional health. So what began as her personal healing journey evolved into a new mission to help other women to shift out of that survival mode, to reconnect with their bodies and to build a way of living that supports longer-term well-being. So in my chat with Jen, she shared her knowledge in a very grounded and compassionate way. And it's always great to hear, it's encouraging to hear this kind of story of transformation and what's really possible, no matter how bad your stress is, no matter how bad the burnout, that it can be turned around. So we spoke about nervous system regulation, but she explained some of the buzzwords, things that we're hearing a lot about, like vagal toning, and also why some of these or some of the kind of fashionable trends that we are seeing everywhere, like cold water, sea swimming, the ice bath plunges, why these aren't the best solution for everyone. So a lot of you will be relieved to know that. This conversation goes deep, but it's very accessible. And Jen simplified a lot of the things that are quite confusing when we hear about stress management and nervous system regulation. So one really important thing that came out of the conversation was the recognition that we don't have to change everything all at once. Each conversation that I'm bringing you in the High Vibration Reset is an opportunity for you to choose what you see yourself moving forward with. It's about you getting in touch with your intuition and following what that next step is for you. I was actually asked recently, do I not worry about promoting all these other wonderful coaches, practitioners, and guides on the podcast? And my answer was not at all. As Jen mentioned in this podcast, that there are many paths up the mountain. And I honestly believe that the right guide shows up for us all at the right time. So don't get overwhelmed listening to all these amazing people and just decide which voice is currently speaking to your soul. Start small and do check out Jen's offerings in the show notes after listening, because if you're suffering from stress or feel like you're close to burnout, she does have some good courses on offer. So this show is being broadcast in the middle of 2025. So I am giving you a reminder that there is still time to reach your goals this year. Regardless of when you're listening, the best time to start is, of course, always today. And to help you with that, the Life Flow Planner store has 25% off in its mid-year sale. Now, the Life Flow Planner is a 90-day goal-setting tool that gives you a complete strategy for setting and achieving your goals. And the planner is not only a practical tool that has transformed many of my clients' lives, but it is also very beautifully designed by Fiona O'Reilly and On the Dot in Donegal. So make sure you get your planner at 25% off today. Now, this month, every planner purchase gets a free gift of adaptogenic coffee from London Nootropics. So let's get into today's conversation. So welcome, Jen. I am so delighted to have you here on my podcast, finally. I've been following you for some time and getting so much benefit from your Instagram account, which I will add in the show notes, but at the Internal Cosmos, if anybody there can't wait. She has such great content. But anyway, Jen, thank you. And can you start by just telling us a little bit more about how you got into the work that you do?
Absolutely. So for me, I've always worked in corporate, and my idea of success and my validation was so closely linked to productivity and success at work. So a couple years ago, I found myself kind of burning out, and I really started to struggle emotionally with just managing everything in my life. And it came to a tipping point where I just couldn't live my life that way anymore. I was angry. I was frustrated. I wasn't sleeping. I had terrible coping mechanisms where I was drinking too much and smoking too much just to try to get through. And when I reached that tipping point, I realized I just couldn't live my life that way anymore. And that's when I started to look into ways to manage my emotions, process my stress. I got into Kundalini Yoga and eventually teaching different types of mindset and self-help. And that for me really changed my experience of life, and how I felt about myself and how I felt about the external validation that I was getting and how I could change that. And because of how it's changed my life over the past 5 years, and I'm just so passionate about it, I wanted to make sure that I could share that with other people who may find themselves in a similar situation. And I think that's so common in our modern world and our modern society.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot in there I want to unpack, but did you know what was happening to you? So you mentioned burnout. Did you have the concept of what burnout was, or?
Absolutely not.
No.
I actually had, I got physically sick.
Wow.
I had a growth in my abdomen that was like the size of a pear, and then within a couple of weeks, the size of a mango. And that to me, and I went through all of this, the CT scans, the ultrasounds, and I actually got misdiagnosed with ovarian cancer. But that's what they told me it was. And I got rushed into surgery. And it was at that point where I realized everything I'd been doing was the reason that this was happening to me, that my body was just at the point of absolute shutdown and it couldn't cope. And I did need the surgery. It was a growing tumor. It just fortunately did not end up being malignant. And so for me, that's when everything was like, why is this happening? And I knew that the drinking and the smoking and the late nights weren't good and the stress wasn't good. But it's when I started looking into it in more detail that I realized this is actually what's been happening to me. This is why I can't cope. This is why my body's shutting down. This is why my immune system, my digestion, and all of these things are just culminating into this physical breakdown. So that was really a point of enlightenment for me. And I literally just stopped smoking overnight. I was just like,
well done. The moment was so dark that it pushed you into change, I suppose.
Absolutely.
And we hear a lot about that with people that, sometimes it's easier to change when you've no choice. Well, I suppose you did have a choice, but what was the first thing that you did, Jen? So how did you start to make this other than quit smoking? What did you do next?
So the first thing I actually did was I started meditation while I was going through this diagnosis process and while I was going through the lead up to surgery. And that's because I mentally couldn't cope. I was so young. I was in my early 30s. So it was just a lot to process and handle. And given the fatality rate of that diagnosis and the quick growth of the tumor, it was so overwhelming that I needed some way to process my emotions, and I couldn't work out because I was in so much physical pain. So I replaced my exercise classes with meditation classes. And that started my ability to manage my emotions as I was going through this process. And then afterwards, the first thing I did was start to look at my foundations and my habits. You know, what I was eating, how I was sleeping, what I was feeding myself, the drinking, the smoking. And that's when the meditation also led me to Kundalini Yoga, which is a much more embodied practice. And that for me was kind of the progression. But initially it started because I literally couldn't deal with the overwhelm and I didn't know how to process it. And so that meditation really helped me kind of get to that stage where I understood more.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit more about that. So you said this about it allowed you to manage your emotions.
Yeah.
So can you explain a bit more?
I think what tends to happen is we tend to compartmentalize and dissociate when we're feeling that overwhelm and stress and we have unhealthy coping mechanisms. And so what that meditation allowed me to do is allowed me to connect with myself and understand where this overwhelm was coming from. I mean, obviously I was dealing with extenuating circumstances,
Yeah.
but it allowed me to find a peace and calm within myself that allowed me to be able to reconnect and realize all of the things that were going on internally and all the things that I'd been shutting down and pushing down and quieting with all these unhealthy coping mechanisms.
So it wasn't just the overwhelm of the moment or the fear that you were going through with the diagnosis. You started to become aware of other emotions
Absolutely.
from the past.
And the root of the anger that I'd been carrying and not releasing, right? The resentment that I had been developing through my lack of self-care and through the lack of boundaries, especially with work and things like that. It allowed me to realize all of these elements of broadly termed self-care that I wasn't taking care of through my lack of awareness, my lack of self-connection, and allowed me to process that and to kind of start to forgive myself for it and start to move through it so I could come out on the other side.
Okay, amazing. And at that moment then, or at that time you said you started to create better habits.
Yes.
And how did you go about that? Because a lot of people listening, know that they need better habits, want to do that, but find it difficult or overwhelming as well to create new habits. So did you have a way that you did it that made it manageable?
I did. I did it very slowly. I think a lot of the times when we know there's so much we need to change, we have this need to kind of try and change everything all at once. And that in itself can be overwhelming and shut down the process. And for me, what I find most helpful is providing myself with a kind of proof for everything that I'm doing. So I started with the foundations of, like sleep and what I ate. I stopped eating meat because of the inflammatory aspects and, the link to cancer and things like this. And I just started focusing on more whole fruits and vegetables. And I found a lot of proof by reading a lot of papers, watching a lot of documentaries, following a lot of people who are really focused on this area of health and well-being. And I would do things like, in order to reinforce the positive habits, if I was eating like berries, I would look up health benefits of berries, right? And it would give me this positive reinforcement that what I'm doing is the right thing.
Very good.
And I think that for me, that kind of positive reinforcement built momentum. It built validation in my choices and it made it easier to keep going. And I would do that with everything. If I went to a workout class, I would look up the benefits of this workout. I would look up the benefits of this types of food, the benefits of, and feeding myself that constant validation enabled me to maintain the momentum that I had kind of started through that habit. But again, I did it very slowly. I just focused on the food and I would look up everything about the food, everything about the inflammation, everything about the nutrients, and just consistently give myself that positive reinforcement.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I find that as well with my clients. It's that, start small and do it so often that you get the benefits of this habit before you start moving on to another habit.
Absolutely.
And that's something actually from your Instagram. I'm always looking with my with my mouth getting watery, looking at all the fruit that you're chopping, and you always have such a table of delicious foods there being prepared.
I'm all about the micronutrients. What can I say?
I'd say you've enough there to feed your whole neighborhood, though. With it.
I consume a ridiculous amount of fruits and vegetables. Like I'm literally an elephant, you know.
But Jen, do you actually? It's something I often meant to ask you. When you chop that fruit, do you freeze some of it, or do you believe that it should be consumed fresh?
Oh, freezing is fantastic.
Mm.
But typically when I have fresh fruit and vegetable, I consume it immediately, even if I put it in a smoothie or something like that. Because I think when you do the freezing, I actually prefer to buy frozen fruits and vegetables than to freeze them myself. And that's because they're often picked at the time of ultimate ripeness, and then they're frozen at that time, and that preserves more of the nutrients over time. Whereas a lot of fruits and vegetables can sometimes lose, the nutritional quality decreases over time. So if I purchase this fruit that maybe have been imported and then I go through the freezing process myself, I find it's just a personal preference to then just buy the frozen fruit, which I do have, especially for things like smoothies and things like that. But it's not as aesthetically pleasing for my videos.
Yeah, no, definitely. So nutrition then was a big part of the change. Do you think nutrition is an important place to start for everyone, or do you think it depends on the person what habit they should start with?
I think that there are really 4 pillars when you're looking at regulating your nervous system, coming out of dysregulation. And the first pillar that everyone should always look at is their foundations. And their foundations are always made up of sleep, hydration, and nutrition. So I think for everyone, if you don't have those pillars in place, that is one of the most important places to start. So I think that's important for everyone because it's on a physiological and biological level. If you don't have a good sleep routine, you aren't feeding and nourishing your body properly, you aren't getting enough hydration, then you're going to find it really difficult, even if you onboard the next level, to move up that hierarchy. So I think depending on where you are, if you have those foundations set, fabulous, move on. But if you don't, then I do think that everyone should start there.
Okay. You mentioned 4 pillars and then you said sleep, hydration, nutrition.
They're part of my foundation. So 1 pillar is foundations. I have 4 pillars. And the foundations is like that physiological, so the sleep, nutrition, hydration. And then I think connection with self is the 2nd pillar. And I think that comes a lot from decreasing distractions and overstimulation. So you can give yourself the space to really feel into yourself. And then there's the top-down approach through mindset and changing your story and identity. Mm-hmm. And there's the bottom-up approach, which is supporting that through your physical practices, the release of that tension and the release of those emotions that are stored. So it seems a little complex, but those 4 pillars would be the foundations, like your physiological foundations, your connection to self, an up-down approach when you look at the mind to body, and the bottom-up approach when you look at the body to mind.
Not complicated at all.
I know. But I feel like we often distill these very complex concepts, and it's actually simple. It just seems like a lot. But that's why we work through it progressively.
Very slowly.
Exactly. And that's why you just focus on one thing at a time. If it's the foundations, we start with the nutrition and sleep. Then we move up to connection to self. Then we move up to how we process our emotions through our mind and our body.
Very good. And when it comes to then starting with, what I wanted to say was the nervous system.
Yes.
So explain to us a little bit more about that. How do you know if your nervous system is dysregulated, or, isn't everybody's nervous system dysregulated nowadays? Busy, stressful lives.
I think, unfortunately, yes, that baseline is there, which is why I feel like my work is so important. And I feel like people who do mindset work, it's so important. And people who share yogic or meditation information, it's so important. So I do think a lot of us are living in, unfortunately, a state of dysregulation. But what people kind of misunderstand is they feel like being regulated means that you should feel good all the time. Right. But having a regulated nervous system, what it means is that you can experience times of hyperactivity or downregulation where you feel stressed or things are overwhelming, but it's how you move between those states. Our baseline should always be at that balanced state, But if you find yourself always being stressed, always being overstimulated, or always being depressed and sad, that's when you're living in dysregulation. You need to be able to move into those states as situations require, and then bring yourself back into balance. And the pace at which we're able to do that is really what dictates our regulation. So if you get stuck in hypervigilance, if you get stuck in states of like low regulation where you're depressed and sad, that's when you're living in a dysregulated state. When your baseline isn't feeling generally good, but it's feeling generally bad for one reason or the other.
So how do we reset?
We reset through the 4 pillars.
Okay.
Yeah. So we reset by first identifying what would be most significant to us. For some people, that might be the narrative they have. That might be mindset work, right? That might be the top-down approach. For other people, and that's if your foundations are good. So we should always start with our foundations, because your routines and your sleep and your well-being are the foundations to regulate your body as a whole. For other people, it may be that they're just so overstimulated constantly. We're just so over-distracted. You know, you do dishes with the TV on, you're constantly on your phone. There's never times of sitting with yourself. And that can be one of the most powerful ways to slow down, to give yourself space, and to regulate. And I think that's just a huge issue just because of our exposure to screens, our light stimulation, the nature of our work and stress and everything like that. So I think it can be very individual as to where you should start. And it should either be what's going to be most impactful for you where you are right now, or what's going to be easiest to onboard. Because sometimes the biggest barrier is we try to climb the mountain all at once. So if it's just easiest for you to start with one level, start with that, because it'll enable you to move into the others more easily once you start to feel better and build that momentum, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, no, I know exactly. For some people, it might be getting out in nature that just helps them, or it could be sleeping, gives them a little bit more energy so that they can even contemplate making changes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it really is very individual. And I think that's why it's so important to look at your particular circumstances. And that's why coaches can be so helpful, because they can help you identify where you kind of go to first.
Yeah. And Jen, if you are somebody who might be, what did you call hypervigilance, in that, you know, very stressed out state?
Yes.
And then the other type of nervous system dysregulation, is it possible that both can happen to you, or are you likely to be in one or the other?
It is definitely possible that both can happen to you, but it typically happens that often when you're in that hypervigilance for so long, you can drop down into that state because of just overwhelm and exhaustion. So typically you have a more dominant state, but you can fluctuate between them. But there are often causes for that. Like often if you're in both, it's probably because one is leading to the other. And it's often that hypervigilance that leads to that downregulation. Or you can just have issues with depression and dopamine, and especially with overstimulation with social media. Our regulated dopamine levels can drop to a point where our body doesn't produce enough regular dopamine because we're so used to the constant stimulation. And then when you don't get that, you're in a constant state of downregulation. So it can be quite complicated, but it's not as important as figuring out ways to come back into balance. Because either state, if you find ways to calm your system and to reconnect with your system, it'll bring you back into balance.
Okay. So, as you say, it can be quite complicated, but let's try and simplify it.
Okay.
So in terms of, if there's somebody listening who, you know, has the issue, if there's somebody, I say it's probably everybody listening that has a social media addiction.
Yeah.
But let's say something like that, you know, social media, we're busy at work, the kids are constantly at us, we're in that state where it's go, 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 we've too much to do. What's a quick way that we can improve that or help ourselves? What kind of tips do you have? Or
no, that's great.
Yeah.
So I think from a habitual standpoint, if you can drop some of that stimulation, you know, decreasing your screen time, just finding time to sit with yourself, that's incredibly powerful. But you can also do vagal toning exercises. So things like just breathing deeply into your belly, doing gentle eye movements that help to signal safety to the body can be incredibly helpful. Things like meditation, guided meditation, all of these are little tools that you can use that'll help your body relax and come back into a calm state in the moment. So that's why a lot of people talk about, doing breath work where you do a very long exhale, because even that in itself helps to calm the system and signal safety. So those are great tools to use in the moment, and they can help you at that time. But overall, they're more like taking Advil when you have a headache, rather than being like treating the source of the headache itself, right? So I think those tools are incredibly valuable and you should integrate them into your life. But if the root cause is that overstimulation and that constant go, then ideally what you want to do is work on reducing that,
Your habits.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something there that I hadn't heard before. Did you say eye movement?
Yes. So eye movements are actually a great way because I use the ocular system to signal safety. And so going outside and simply scanning the horizon really slowly can help calm the system. That's why people also sit outside and watch clouds or stars or things like that. One of my favorite yogic practices is actually the figure 8, where you look at your thumb in front of you and without moving your head, you just slowly follow your thumb in a large figure 8 around the body. And that creates signals of safety. And it's often because when we're in states of hypervigilance, we become very focused because our body's trying to perceive threats and danger. And our vision becomes very narrow. So using these broad eye movements and broad sweeping movements, sitting and looking to your left for 30 seconds, and then switching to your right for 30 seconds, I'm going to yawn. You'll often actually trigger a yawn because it calms the vagus nerve and it signals safety. So it's an alternative to breath work. They all do the same thing. Many paths up the mountain. And this is just another one of those tools.
Yeah, it's great. I'm the type of person who gets bored very easily. So habits for me, for years, I tried to create habits and failed. And a lot of that was, now I know that a lot of that was my internal story and my mindset that prevented me. But also I learned to vary my habits.
Yes.
So I use a lot of different methods in order to get to the same goal. It just gives me that little bit of maybe dopamine that encourages me to keep going.
I'm the same way. I use different tools at different times. There isn't always a one size fits all. And that's why it's nice to have a toolbox, because then you can pull out a different tool as you feel like you need it.
Yeah. Okay, so that was some great tips there for being in hypervigilance.
Yes.
So I have, I've had a couple of clients over the years that would come to a session, they create goals, but then they are just frozen. They can't move forward. They keep trying to do it with their head. They convince themselves they're going to do it, but they never act.
Yeah.
What can you say about those type of people, or what tips do you have for those type of people?
I think that's such a great question. I think that's a twofold answer. First of all, I think from your perspective, again, when you're talking about the mindset, I feel like sometimes we need to connect with our why in a real meaningful way. And a lot of times we do that intellectually. I find visualization is super helpful for that, but not from I want this job, this car, this house, but what that really should be is what this feeling is. We want this house because we want safety. We want stability. We want that family because we want love and the ability to give our nurturing. So I think connecting with that feeling is super helpful. But I think also bringing yourself into a regulated state is also why you can't move forward. So they have that story in their mind and they can't get past that story, but it's because moving forward feels unsafe in their body.
Okay.
So creating that sense of safety in the body where it's okay to move forward, it's okay to mess up. Often it can also be rooted in fears of failure, fears of success, past experiences. So that's all stored in our body. So bringing yourself to a place where you can feel balanced in your body is incredibly helpful. And I think doing a series of somatic movements or things like that can also really help you move through those internal stuckness feelings, because they help you release those feelings of lack of safety internally. So it helps you move forward because the things that you're internalizing as fear and you're holding into your body, even though your mind may have changed, you may still be holding on to those feelings within your body. So being able to reconnect with the body and create that feeling of safety can often move us through that feeling of stuckness.
Okay. So I've a lot of questions here as well.
Please.
Yeah. In terms of the somatic.
Yes.
So I've just signed up to your 42-day somatic series.
She's a long one.
I'm on day 6. And one of the reasons that I did, Jen, is because I have a lot of tension in my neck and shoulders, which has been there for a long time.
Yes.
I've gone to chiropractors. I get regular massage. I have lots of lovely therapists, craniosacral, lots of really good people that help me to a certain extent. But then the tension, I don't know if it comes back or if it's just deep rooted there.
Yeah.
Now, as I've been doing your exercises, there have been moments where I've felt a release, a twitch, or something feels like it's moving inside. So can you explain a bit more about that, and also maybe just a little bit more about somatic work and what it's trying to achieve?
Perfect. So when we talk about somatic work, we're really just talking about like that mind-body connection. We often think of ourselves as separate entities. But our brain is just an organ, just like our heart, just like our liver, and our nervous system connects it all together. And we do tend to store these emotions internally. So typically, when you're talking about, is it just really deep-rooted stress? First of all, it's so hard to speak in absolutes, but it definitely can be, and that can be a huge cause of this tension. Even if we've done the mental work, we've moved through it, we may not have actually processed it and released it physically, which is why you might be feeling those twinges as you kind of go through it. So I think one of the reasons that, I focus on things like a 42-day somatic series is because you're looking at how the body and the mind and the nervous system rewire over time, how habits form, and how that neuroplasticity takes time to take root and to release. So when you have experienced a lot of stress or trauma or just really high emotional states, and you haven't had a chance to release them from your body, then that's when we might feel that tension build up over time because it's just so deeply rooted. And it's really difficult to intellectualize because it's not something we're taught to think about or to even feel into. So I think somatic work is so great, and this can come in many different forms because it allows you to reconnect with the body, to create feelings of safety within the body, and this allows it to release over time. It's a layered work and it's a layered process, just like building a habit is. Essentially, we want to allow our system to get to the point of safety and release so it can actually move through those emotions. There were a couple layers to that question that you asked, so I'm not sure if I addressed them properly. So just remind me, what else were you asking there?
No, I think you did. I was saying about somatics in general, and then sorting my shoulders out was the second part of it.
No, and it's something that was really difficult for me to come on board with when I first started doing these practices like Kundalini Yoga. And that's another reason why I looked so much into the science of it, because I could feel changes in my system. But because we are such an intellectualized society, I couldn't understand or allow myself to fully release them without looking into the science behind it. And that's when I started looking into like what the nervous system does. Why does our body actually hold tension? Like these are patterns that our body remembers and we hold on to. And if we don't work through those patterns, then we stay stuck in them and they kind of build on top of each other. And that's when we feel those physical manifestations. Okay. But it was very difficult for me at first to do these practices because things like Kundalini can be framed very, very spiritually. My mom's a biologist and I'm a very science-based person. So I had a hard time coming to terms with it without finding the scientific backing to it and these studies on like neuroplasticity and elements of that.
Okay. So do you still practice Kundalini Yoga?
I do. Yeah. I don't practice it as consistently as I used to. When I was moving through this time when I had so many emotions to process, I practiced Kundalini Yoga probably 5 times a week. And it's a long practice. The standard Kundalini class is an hour and a half long. And it can be very challenging because it's a series of poses with quite extreme breath work and times of meditation. And you can get very frustrated and you can become very angry because all these things are coming up for you that you maybe not have processed. I remember actually bursting out into tears in a Kundalini class. It was very embarrassing.
I'm sure they'd seen it before.
Yeah. Oh, they had. My teacher came over and started like pulling things out of my aura. And again, I was like, oh my God, this is just so ridiculous. But, then you come on board with it because you
Yeah,
trouble.
because it works.
Yeah, because it works. So now I probably practice a full class once a week. But I do much shorter practices. So I will do like a meditation or a movement from Kundalini for 3 to 11 minutes. So I'll do like breath of fire, which is which is like a pumping of the stomach with a very intense breath, which actually helps us move through a lot of anger because I was holding a lot of anger and resentment and it can sometimes still come back. Right. So I will do individual movements or elements of practice from that. There's lots of movements in my 42-day somatic series that are drawn from Kundalini Yoga, but they're done in a much more soothing way because Kundalini is a very aggressive form of emotional processing. And I feel like with the somatic series, I want it to be a slow release over time. But I will offer like Kundalini classes I've done like corporate classes and things like this for people who are ready or wanting that kind of change. But it's probably the more most aggressive form of yoga you can do.
No, I love that about your series is it's short, and very doable for somebody. Just 10 minutes each day you can commit to, rather than a 90-minute yoga class. It's probably a bit extreme for most people.
Yeah. And it's about that habitual embodiment, right? Because we talk about that needing that connection to self. And it's just that consistency over time, which allows you to kind of build it over time and also have that connection on a more consistent basis, which will help rewire your system.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find in your experience that there are different areas holding different emotions?
Absolutely. And this has actually been a very difficult thing for me to process because I can't find too much science on it, and that always irks me.
Yeah.
But it's true that we tend to hold different emotions in our hips, in our neck and shoulders. Stress often accumulates there, which is why a lot of us feel that tension. When we tense up, it's also a physical reaction we do when we're stressed, and then it becomes habitual. And then we also tend a lot of trauma and grief in our hips. So that's another reason why in my series, I wanted to work through the different areas of the body so you can slowly focus on it and release any emotion that you may be holding over time.
Yeah, very good. Very good. You mentioned earlier, Jen, vagal toning. We're talking about breath work for vagal toning. In Ireland, cold water swimming has become, the most popular hobby since COVID, I think. That's really good for vagal toning. Is that right? Or does it depend on who you are and what type of a nervous system you have?
It completely depends. So when we talk about vagal toning, really what we're just talking about, again, these, somatic, vagal toning, that can be very buzzy words, but it's because, again, as humans, we love to intellectualize. And so it creates a system for us to understand. So our vagus nerve runs from the base of our skull all the way down through to our lower abdomen, and it connects our major organs, our gut, our heart, and it helps to regulate your nervous system. So that's when you're in a sympathetic state. So you're in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, overwhelm, you're in that hyperactivity as well. That's where you're in a sympathetic nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system is when you're in that calm state of rest and digest. And the vagus nerve regulates how we move through between those two systems. So when people talk about vagal toning, they essentially just mean stimulating the vagus nerve to move you out of, that sympathetic nervous system into that parasympathetic. But there are many ways to do that. Cold water therapy can be great if it's appropriate for you. You'll see a lot of practitioners also speaking about how it can be a really intense way of doing that, though. So if you find yourself really in a state of chronic stress, it can be a bit much for you. right? And you might feel good at first, but you might actually like overstimulate your system again. So some people, it's fantastic. Personally, I just don't like cold water. I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. So it's not a path for me, but everything that we talk about in terms of breath work, in terms of somatics, in terms of just doing some deep breathing, in terms of doing eye exercises, all of these are vagal toning exercises.
Okay.
So you don't have to choose one or the other. You know, if that works for you, fabulous, do it. If it's not your jam, you don't have to do it. That's completely fine. There's again, many paths up the mountain, many roads to Rome. So you don't have to do one or the other if it's not ideal for you.
And I think possibly that is one of the things that confuses people.
Yeah.
There are so many paths and which one to take, because when something becomes popular, you know, people can feel like, oh, I should be, you know, plunging myself in ice, all right, because it's fashionable.
Yes.
But also it's that confusing bit, you know, how can we simplify it enough just for somebody to take that first step or to take that next action? Have you any advice there?
I think we just need to frame how we look at this in a different way. If you don't like pizza, you don't eat pizza. You know, so if you try pizza and you don't like it, don't force yourself to eat it, right? So if you see a breath work or if you see people jumping into icy water, by all means, you know, give yourself the opportunity to try things, but then also give yourself enough self-compassion and acceptance to realize that not all things are meant for you and not all things are right for you. You know, fashion comes and goes. It doesn't mean that we all should be walking around in crop tops. You know, if you don't like a crop top, girl, don't wear a crop top, you know? So I think framing it in that way and giving yourself enough compassion to realize that some things just aren't for me and that's okay. And having a curiosity about it. And again, that helps you connect more to yourself when you realize this is for me and this isn't for me.
Yeah, so trying a little bit more to get in touch with your intuition and trusting that, yeah, it's okay not to like what everybody else is doing. Just,
absolutely.
Absolutely. So try and even look and see, is there one thing that doesn't seem so difficult or overwhelming that I could possibly take a step into exploring more?
Exactly. And then once you have that, you can build from there.
Absolutely. So you talk about many forms of rest. So it's not just enough to lie down on the sofa and watch Netflix, no? What other types of rest are there?
So when I talk about rest, I also think that rest has two purposes, right? First, it's that state of relaxation we talk about, but more so it's also about recharging us. Sometimes we can feel unfulfilled or stressed or anxious, not because we're doing too much of something, but because we're doing too little of something that fills us up and gives us purpose. So when I look at the different types of rest, you know, if you're feeling stuck or like you can't move forward, often creative rest is great. And that's finding inspiration without an obligation to produce. And so for some people, that's an art gallery. For some people, that's being out in nature. It's something that inspires you without requiring something from you. So creative rest is fantastic for that. We also need emotional rest because some people are always in emotional output mode where they're always caring for others, they're always onboarding other people's emotions, and they're not getting the opportunity to actually process those emotions, which allows them to fill up their own emotional cup. So that can be, you know, talking to a friend, doing therapy, journaling, but those kind of emotional rest gives us that emotional space we need to become who we are. Then there's also things like spiritual rest. We as humans have an innate interconnectivity to each other and the world around us. We often separate ourselves from that, but that's why people feel so good when they go for a lovely little walk in nature, right? Because we are nature. And in our modern society, the separation, this over-intellectualization makes it difficult for us to feel that interconnectedness. And people can find that in many ways. People find it through religion, through prayer, through spiritual activities, through ritual, through meditation. But having that ability to feel interconnected and to feel a oneness, even when we're on our own, fills you up in a way and gives you balance and safety in a way that no other type of rest or activity can. So there's the creative rest, spiritual rest, emotional rest. We obviously have our physical rest, which we know is, sleeping, but then there's
Something we understand. Yeah.
yeah. There's also active and passive physical rest where you need like stretch and gentle releases to also
Mhm.
like reconnect with your body, which people don't always talk about. So I think incorporating all these different elements is really important if you want to just feel that element of wholeness. And some people may just be missing one or the other,
Yeah.
right? You may have activities like social rest is also super important. If you're for me, being in my job was very socially demanding.
Mm.
I was the person who managed conflict in the office, who mediated it, who was, in constant social output. You're leading meetings, you're doing things like that. And then if you have a demanding social group, that can also be very strenuous.
Yeah.
So and social rest isn't about isolation. Social rest is actually about reconnecting with people who make you feel safe and heard. And that's so important because,
Looking for anything from you there.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. People who you can just be yourself with,
Mhm.
because we are social animals and social connection is important. One of the ways that we develop as children is through co-regulation, where we actually sync up with our
Mm.
caregivers and feel their emotions. And that's how we learn to self-regulate as well. So co-regulation and being around people who help you feel regulated because they're regulated can actually help a lot,
Yeah.
in terms of rebalancing and feeling the safety and feeling validated, all those things that can help you feel full. So all these elements of your life create your whole life. And I think we sometimes can focus on one or the other and we separate from the other, not realizing that we're these whole, beautiful,
Mhm.
complex beings. And we need all of these elements to really help us feel balanced and fulfilled and more at ease in our life.
Mm. That's a very good point as well. The people we surround ourselves from, we're picking up on their nervous system. I'm a heart math coach as well,
Yes.
which tells us that, the heart rate variability can be felt a meter, 3 meters, I think it was said, outside of our bodies. So we're actually picking up somebody's vibe and whether they're in a regulated state. So it is a good idea to maybe audit who you're spending time with so
Yeah.
that you can see how they're impacting you. And is it your own problems or are you carrying theirs with you as well? But you said something there, Jen, as well, that I thought was really cool, which is finding creative inspiration without the need to create.
Yes.
So I would be very guilty of that, always in create mode. What next? What do I need to do? And that's something that I'll definitely be thinking about, just that, as you said, the gallery or things that do inspire and that fill me up, but without that obligation.
It's so important. And I think when you're in a space of creation, when you're a coach as well, when you're constantly looking at that output, it's so easy to be stuck in that need to create. I feel as well as a creator, like we're supposed to be posting every day or everything like this. You feel that need to create and that obligation to create. But it comes so much more easily when we can be inspired, and it allows us to step into more of that flow state with our natural creativity, I think, which is just so beautiful.
When you have bad days,
Mm.
low moments, what's your first go-to habit or practice that you do to try and reset yourself?
The first thing I do is self-compassion.
Mhm.
Is a practice of self-compassion.
Yeah.
So the last thing I would ever want to do is push that emotion away, put it in a box and be like, well, I just have to move on with my life. If I'm feeling upset or frustrated or disappointed, the first thing I do is go internal, to that emotion, to accept it, to thank it, to find out why I'm feeling that emotion. All of our emotions are typically trying to tell us something, right? We're angry because of boundaries being crossed. We're frustrated because we're unable to move forward and we feel stuck, or we have the desire to get to something and we're not able to get there. So the first thing I do is practice that self-compassion. And it often involves me doing a mixture of like a bottom up and top down approach where I sit with myself
Mhm.
and I let myself feel and connect with what I'm feeling. And then I write it out in a journal, because that helps me to process the signals I'm getting from my body and to intellectualize them and then see the narrative that may be leading me there. And then once I've kind of gone through that state of processing, I might just be exhausted and overwhelmed by it. So I'll give myself that compassion. If what I need to do is curl up in a ball and cover myself with a weighted blanket, I'll do that. If what I need is to release the energy, I'll go for a walk, or maybe do a workout or something like that. But I think understanding the emotion, connecting with the emotion, feeling it fully, and accepting it is always the most important step for me, because it's through that I can move through it. And I may not move through it immediately. It may be something that I just need to sit with, and I just need to let myself feel or let myself cry. And that's completely fine. Um, that's the most important thing. And I think that's how I'm able to move through them, is through that process of acceptance and understanding.
And I think that's probably where in the past you went for a drink or had a cigarette or
Yes, exactly.
picked up
Exactly.
the phone. And that's people's typical response to emotions that we don't like.
Yeah. And I think one of the issues is the accessibility of our phones.
Mm.
When I'm going through those hard times, I'll even catch myself now. I get like a tinge and I will pick up my phone and open Instagram. And it is absolutely insane. And it's because I'm, again, seeking that quick feeling of goodness and distraction, that dopamine hit, that stepping away. It allows me to move away from that emotion rather than sitting with it, which can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. That's exactly what my main issue was before, is I wasn't able to feel and process. And now I do have to work on separating myself from these distractions that we have that kind of feed that negativity.
What about, Jen, people who have extreme emotion, maybe trauma? How that's not always easy and accessible to sit with the negative emotion. So, do you have advice for people who may be in that state?
That's a very difficult one, because I think
Mm.
it also depends on the extent of the trauma, the type of the trauma, right? If you're dealing with physical abuse issues, sometimes moving into the body can be incredibly difficult.
Mm.
If it's more of a mental abuse situation, it can be difficult to process that. So I think finding safe ways to reconnect that are small. I think therapy is incredibly beneficial for everyone. So if you feel like you have extreme trauma, then I think you need help in order to move through that
Yeah.
in a safe way. If you're dealing with just kind of an emotional trauma that may not be as extreme as that abuse that we can think of, then finding small ways to reconnect with yourself that feel safe, that don't necessarily directly address it. That's why I like things like somatic practice, because you're not actually thinking of the feeling. You don't have to identify it or what it is in order to just sit with yourself and move through it. It can also be easier than sitting in stillness, because what you're actually focusing on is the movement or
Yeah.
the breath, but it still allows you to create those signals of safety internally. And that's why I think for me, things like Kundalini were fabulous, because I was able to address those issues indirectly,
Hmm.
without having the focus be on them, but
Right.
still get those internal signals of safety, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. So it's no harm if somebody doesn't know whether it's safe for them to start a practice like this, is really to maybe have a session with a professional, and they can advise them if they feel, yeah, it's safe to continue with some, even meditation can be
Absolutely.
triggering for some people.
Absolutely.
Um, Jen, what does high vibration mean to you?
Oh,
Living in high vibration.
that's such a great point, or such a great question, rather. I think for me, living in high vibration means living in alignment. And living in alignment means living with the state of who you are and accepting who you are and being able to feel good in that state. So it doesn't mean you have to be, the most successful or anything like this, but living in a high vibration state is just being able to feel good with your own self and with your own presence, because you're doing things that are aligned with who you are, what your values are, what your morals are. And that to me is a high vibration state. It's not feeling good all the time necessarily, but it's feeling aligned with yourself and with your soul.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do things that aren't in alignment, and that's what lowers our vibration. So for me, my bosses would ask me to do some things that I didn't feel were morally correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I would get resentful and angry about that, and it would lower my vibration. Um, when I do things like I love animals, I go out and I feed the strays every day. It raises my vibration because it's more in alignment of who I am and what
Yeah.
I want, what my values are.
Yeah.
So I think having that connection to self, so you can truly understand who you are and what you want, how you want to feel, is so important, because that is what your vibration is for you.
Yeah. And it's true, we can't be in high vibration all of the time, but if we allow ourselves those moments, and, sometimes they're there to inform us to work through them, but it's that acceptance of self that helps us shift back into a more positive state more quickly.
Absolutely. And I do think that practices like visualization are so helpful for that, because they can
Mm,
tell you how you want to feel. And
yes.
really what it all is it's about how we want to feel. It's not even about the actions that we take. It's I want to feel love. I want to feel safety. I want to feel stability. I want to feel acceptance. And
Yes.
then finding those ways or that actions that make you feel that way.
Beautiful. Beautiful. What's bringing you joy right now?
This is so ridiculous, but my cats bring me so much joy. um, it's so silly to say, and it sounds so trivial.
Oh,
Um, but my ability to care for them, to nurture them, my ability to I'm in Morocco right now, so there's a lot of stray animals, and it can give you kind of compassion fatigue, because you
yeah.
see
Yeah.
so much suffering, not just from the strays, but from domesticated animals and things like that, like the work donkeys and so on. Um, but it brings me joy that every day I'm able to go out and help them. It helps me overcome feelings of hopelessness, because right now I can feel very overwhelmed by the state of the world. You
Yeah.
know, we have such a large input of things going on with wars and
Yes.
just political views, and moving towards fascism and racism, and it can be overwhelming. And the
Oh,
way that I overcome those feelings of hopelessness is by doing little acts of kindness. Um, and
yeah.
those little things are what bring me joy right now.
Yeah.
It's not even like big things. It really is just being able to help in some way, making my little donations, which aren't big, but being able to go out and help the animals and do things like that. That's where I find solitude from the hopelessness, and I mean solitude, where I find solace and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fabulous advice. And I think it is about, bringing it back to the present moment again,
Yes,
because that's the only thing I can control. When we get those feelings of hopelessness, or not being able to help all of these people who are suffering, some people think it's selfish to bring it back to yourself, but I think we have to come back to controlling what we can control,
absolutely.
helping where we can help, as you say, in our little way. And one of my mantras or affirmations is, I have everything I need for today. And
That's
it is just
beautiful.
trying to, deal with what we need to deal with and bring our thoughts back in.
Yes.
Um,
And I think it can feel like what we do is not enough, but we
mm,
are one person in the cog of life. And I think that if everybody just did one little thing, it would make a big difference. So that's how I try and look at my one little thing. I don't remember where this story came from, if I heard it when I was a child, but there was, a girl walking down the beach, throwing starfish back into the ocean. There was thousands and hundreds of starfish on the beach. And someone asked her, like, why are you doing that? Like, there's so many starfish, you can't possibly save them all. It won't make any difference. And she said, well, it makes a difference to that starfish. And I feel like that's just a great approach to have.
yeah, power of one.
Exactly.
All we can do. Jen, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. We will share your links below. Is there anything final you would like to share or let people know about?
No, I just wanted to thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our discussion. I hope it was clear and, and understandable. And I just really appreciate your insights and the content you share and the work that you do too. And I just really appreciate you having me on. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jen. I hope you got great benefit from today's chat. And remember that you don't have to do everything that you heard about today. If Jen's words resonated, do check out her courses. Links are below in the show notes. And make sure you're following her on Instagram. Her reels are really deep in information and also very entertaining. Now, please make sure you're following the High Vibration Reset podcast on wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple, and share it with your friends and neighbors. Don't keep it all to yourself. And if you're enjoying it and it is making some kind of a difference in your life, I'd really appreciate a 5-star rating. Also, remember, if your company are looking for a motivational speaker or there is interest in leadership training, reach out and have a beautiful inner day. Thank you for listening.